colleague. Senator Back.
Thank you,
Senator
Acting
Cameron.
Deputy President. I just want to reflect on the circumstance we find ourselves at the moment in this country, and that is the parlous state with regard to our energy supply, and particularly the insecurity of the energy supply in the eastern states, of course including your home state of South Australia. Acting Deputy President, I want to start with the observation that if you take a country which is the geographic area of America, mainland USA without Alaska, in a population which has got the population of Greater New York, about 23–24 million people, the question becomes one of how is Australia such a wealthy country on a per capita basis? People come up with all sorts of different solutions. The answer has always been two words, and those are cheap energy. We have had cheap energy, and indeed in your home state of South Australia, your then Premier Playford came up with the realisation that South Australia needed an advantage, and South Australia developed cheap energy. And what a lamentable circumstance we have today, when your state in fact undertook a complete statewide blackout of power just recently. But of course the unfortunate circumstance we find ourselves, Acting Deputy President, is that over the last successive years we have seen an erosion in Australia's cheap energy. We've seen an erosion in that singular advantage that we've had. We saw the introduction of the Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme. We saw the carbon tax. We've seen the burgeoning of renewable energy targets, which of course were originally an incentive of the Howard government back in 1997. But what's even more disappointing, of course, is that this is against an international trend. The United States, for example, upon the technology of being able to source shale gas and discover shale gas over the last few years, for example, in 2013, the cost of electricity to an American manufacturer was half that of a German manufacturer, and manufacturing came back onshore. Today, that figure has changed from being a half to a third. The cost of electricity for an American manufacturer today is one-third that of Germany, and we see a burgeoning of manufacturing in that country. At a time, not only have we reversed what was the advantage of cheap energy, but of course we know Australia, mainly through Western Australia but also through Queensland, will go past Qatar in the next 2 years as the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, at a time when, regrettably, we have taken the decisions we've taken to actually add to the cost of manufacturing, add to the cost of consumers, be they residential, domestic, business, nursing homes, etc. Acting Deputy President, let me give you the latest figures which are available from the International Energy Agency in terms of delivery of global energy. Oil is 31% contributor, coal is 29% contributor to global energy, gas is 21.5%, nuclear is 5%, bioenergy is 10%, hydroelectricity is 2.5%, solar is 0.1% contributor to global energy, and wind is 0.4%, 0.4% of global energy. And yet we see the circumstance as we are rushing in this country towards getting rid of the greatest advantage we've had, and of course that's been cheap energy. In the week leading up to the election, Acting Deputy President, publicly in Australia I made two predictions relating to your home state. The first was that by July there would have to be a significant increase in the cost of electricity to consumers in South Australia to the tune of 15 to 18%. I was wrong, it was 20%. And the second prediction I made was that South Australia was facing a statewide blackout of electricity. I didn't think it was going to happen as early as it did, so I'll make this prediction today. There will be another statewide blackout of electricity this summer in South Australia. There you are. It's on record for you. And regrettably, the reason we find ourselves in this circumstance has been decisions of successive governments, Labor governments, dare I say it, who have unrealistically placed increased targets in place for renewables. It was the—
Senator Back resume a seat. Point of order to Senator Farrell.
Senator Back is completely misrepresenting the power position in South Australia. The reason that there are power problems in South Australia
There is no
is
point.
because his party
Senator
sold the
Farrell.
Electricity Trust.
There is no point of order. Senator Banks.
For to see that Senator Farrell is still awake, because I'm going to go on to the main reasons why and why the lights will once again go off. But it was the Howard government, of course, that originally introduced a renewable energy target of 2% in 1997, and upon the recommendations of a review committee in 2003, the Howard government then accepted the recommendations of that committee, and that was to remain at 2%. What did we see? Of course, we then had the South Australian Labor government radically increase that as a percentage. We've seen the Victorian government, even despite the circumstances of those that have happened in South Australia, wanting to move towards levels as high as 30 and 33%. And then, of course, we had Mr Shorten, the Leader of the Opposition, speaking about an increase to 50% of renewables by 2030. Well, the circumstance contrary to that Senator Farrell has just mentioned, we know what happened was that the South Australian government caused the coal-fired power station at Port Augusta to be decommissioned. This afternoon's contribution, I don't have the time to go into the vagaries, particularly of wind power, but we know that firstly it's intermittent. We know secondly that it's unreliable. We know thirdly that it's unpredictable in terms of when and if and how much and for how long. And of course we also know that on the occasion of the blackout occurring in South Australia recently, it was a software problem associated with the wind turbines that commenced the debacle that became the loss of the interconnector from Victoria. We have the circumstance with Victoria, Acting Deputy President, where Victoria currently is a net exporter of electricity and will soon become a net importer as a result, of course, of the decision only made in the last few days for the 1,500 or 1,600 megawatt baseload capacity Victorian power station at Hazelwood to be decommissioned. It's interesting, it was only in the relatively recent time of the Gillard government that a $500 million subsidy was given to keep that power station alive. We now have the Victorian government rushing around the countryside talking about subsidies to be given to those who will be disaffected. Regrettably, we had the Greens boasting about the loss of jobs occasioned by that particular circumstance. And of course the story is that Victoria will become supposedly a net importer of electricity. And it has been put to me that Tasmania will be one of the suppliers. Well, let me assure you there's no way any time soon that Tasmania can be a reliable supply of power to Victoria. The turbines in the hydroelectricity scheme are badly overworked and underserviced. The level of water in their dams is such that they will not be able to generate sufficient electricity, and indeed they have cooked the Bass link between Tasmania and Victoria, so it is not operational. And of course, going back to Hazelwood, just to make sure it was closed, the Andrews government placed an incredible increase in the size of royalties on coal to make sure that it would become uneconomic. But, Acting Deputy President, I'm really more interested in solutions for the future. The first one that I would say to you is the possibility of hydroelectricity being extended with greater efficiency in the Snowy Mountains scheme, software, hardware activities. We know already that Tasmania is 100% hydro, therefore renewable. Secondly, we have got relatively unlimited gas supply offshore northwest Western Australia, and the long-term capacity exists for that to be piped across to the eastern states to a hub in northern South Australia to be distributed south into South Australia, across into Victoria and New South Wales, and that is eminently feasible and possible. The next one, of course, is one that is off the agenda at the moment, but I'll mention it again briefly, and that is tidal power from the north of Western Australia. In France, the Laurence power station generated by tidal has been operating for 40 years. How can we bring it south? Acting Deputy President, we do so through high-voltage DC transmission lines of the diameter of a normal coaster. I could go on at greater length, of course, about the solutions. There are many. Where we are now is no solution.
Time has elapsed.